Well, hey, good morning, everyone. This is Mike McHenry. Thank you for taking the time to attend our webinar. I'm going to get things kicked off. I'm going to take a little bit of time here just to make sure we've got enough time for people joining. But today, Duncan and myself are going to talk about the state of private cloud. We'd like to share some perspective on what we're seeing in the industry right now in that area. Maybe a little bit of background introduction to myself as people are still joining. My name is Mike McHenry. I'm a principal technologist, field CTO for Lightedge. I've been with Lightedge just about 20 years now, maybe a little bit more than 20 years, about 35 years in the industry. One of the first companies that I worked for, we started up dial-up internet in the Minneapolis market. So I've got a long history of being in technology, primarily in the engineering space, a lot of hands-on, being a system administrator. I've been a Unix admin. I've been a Linux guy. I've been a Windows Server guy. I've been the networking guy, right? Back in those days, you kind of had to do a little bit of everything, but happy to be here talking today to this group. Duncan?
Thanks, Mike. I'm Duncan Garcia. I'm the product manager for cloud here at Lightedge. I've been with the company much shorter time than Mike, since February of this year. But my lineage and history with tech goes back quite a ways as well, about 30 years. I started my career in earnest at Rackspace, which many of you may have heard of, way back in the early 2000s. And I've done a bit of everything as well. Like Mike said, I've had a lot of hands-on jobs as an administrator, but also been a technical trainer, and finally found my way through the sales engineering world over into product management, where I've made my career up to today. So very nice to have everybody, and thanks for joining us. So today I want to go through our agenda real quick here. We're going to talk about evolving cloud strategies, in particular the ones that we're seeing, find relevance in the market today in 2025, where private cloud fits in that story. We're also going to talk about deployment models and use cases, which is probably what a lot of you are here for. And of course, the ever-present AI, data sovereignty, and edge trends. We'll also look at keys to success and common pitfalls in the private cloud world. At the end, we'll talk about some frequently asked questions. This is a give and take session, so please, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask. We're happy to answer those as they come along. So evolving cloud strategies, we have some key takeaways from this slide. Multi-cloud is the norm, and complexity all around technology is rising. It's important to understand that cloud isn't necessarily the destination. It's a strategic decision. It's a solution decision. And you really want to take the application first decisions as they're replacing cloud first mindsets. In other words, we're looking towards what is our workload, what are we trying to solve for, and then we're looking to what tools we have in the cloud world to meet those needs on your workloads. Costs are growing in importance and decision making around cloud spend. We're seeing a trend towards a lot of FinOps tools where people are getting more information about where they're spending their money in the cloud, and using that to increase efficiency through their design architecture. Couple of key data points here. 73% of enterprises now follow a hybrid cloud strategy. That's the strategy that we really lean into here at Lightedge. And we think hybrid really makes a lot of sense for most workloads. And we'll talk more about that as the presentation goes along. 93% of global enterprises use both private and public clouds. That's a big number. And, we work with a lot of customers with exactly this use case, where they've got a kind of a foothold in lots of different technology sets. And then 86% of CIOs globally plan to move some workloads off of public clouds. This is important and increasing. This is not always monetary. There are data sovereignty issues. There is, just straight up workload issues if we're talking about GPUs and AI in the mix.
I think too, Duncan, that second bullet really rings home for me. I hear customers, technologists within, our customers come to us saying leadership wants me to move to the cloud. And there are sometimes limitations to that. So a lot of times I question or kind of challenge that statement of move to the cloud. To your point, it's not necessarily a destination that needs to be moved to. It's attributes that the business is looking for. They're looking for flexibility. They're looking for cost efficiencies. They're looking for scalability and ease of management, right? These systems that get stood up and forgotten about just don't work anymore, right? So a lot of times when leadership says move that to the cloud, we as technologists tend to hear, well, that must mean I've got to put it in a hyperscaler, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that.
No, that's a great point. And there are lots of cloud destinations now, lots of solutions to fit most of those workload needs. So, why does private cloud matter in 2025, or why private cloud matters in 2025? Private cloud investments are growing faster than public cloud. So, Gartner predicts that over 50% of enterprise workloads will be hosted in a private cloud environment, up from 34% in 2024. That's a massive jump. 92% of those businesses trust private cloud for security and compliance. And that's where we see a lot of these workloads hitting the private cloud is, security reasons, compliance reasons, data sovereignty. Public cloud resources can sometimes be unpredictable. Pay-go is great in a lot of ways. It's also can be frustrating and expensive in some ways, especially if you're just starting in a hyperscale cloud and working, with pay-go and understanding all the implications that each of those services bring and how they're built. So that's a big one there. Four major cloud drivers that we see are enhanced security and compliance, and we're going to keep hitting that one. That's a big one. And then, like I was just mentioning, the predictable cost of a dedicated private cloud compared to public clouds and their pay-go or variable billing. Control and customization of complex applications. This is a big one. As workloads get more complex, as customers are trying to do more, to make their business work more efficiently, more effectively, complexity goes up. And so we take a look at that and really try to point customers to a solution as opposed to, a technology in a lot of cases. And then integration with legacy or latency sensitive systems. This is a workload that I know Mike sees on a daily basis, and that we're hyper aware of here at Lightedge, because there are some of those old legacy or latency sensitive systems out there. That we have to get to work with the cloud, and we're finding great ways to see efficiency with those systems as well. Anything you want to add there, Mike? Anything
I think those are great points, Duncan. That integration with legacy systems. There are certain things that just cannot move into the public cloud, right? So I think we're tending to see maybe a second wave of businesses looking at those key applications or those core applications that they were unable to move the first time around. And back to that earlier point, what can I do to extend the attributes of cloud, the manageability, the flexibility of cloud onto those workloads? Maybe it's a manufacturing workload that's tied directly to the manufacturing floor. Maybe it's a mainframe sitting in a data center that just can't be moved into a hyperscaler, right? There's a lot of those kinds of workloads now that the business is coming back around to and saying, what do I do with it?
Absolutely. Great points.
Maybe some additional trends that we see reshaping private cloud in 2025. AI, it's the big buzzword. You can't avoid it. We are seeing large difficulties in terms of businesses that are looking to kind of dabble, expand, build, invest in that space. and they're unable to do so or unwilling to do so. Unable because there's not capacity, unwilling because the data is sensitive and they don't want the risk of the hyperscalers or, third-party cloud companies getting access to that sensitive data, right? So there's a lot of demand right now, a lot of interest in, particularly around private cloud or private infrastructure investment in AI, just due to the type of data that's being held and the uncertainty around who really owns that data when you put it somewhere else. Um, lot of movement. I would say what we're seeing is a lot of early phase interest in that space. There's definitely the companies that are building platforms on that software. Platform developers tend to be a little bit more invested in that space right now, but enterprise customers are definitely looking at AI and trying to develop their strategy in that space. Data sovereignty, we mentioned that, right? You don't know what's going to happen with that data. I think we've all seen these stories as technologists, 23andMe with the DNA, right? You send that data out, you don't think about it. 10 years later, it's a massive issue. So you're seeing a lot of businesses recognize that risk and try, taking steps to make sure that that data does not leave their four walls. Latency tends to be a consideration as well. Sometimes those data sets need to be located close to the source. Network becomes very expensive in some cases when you're operating with large sets of data. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. We talked about the trends that we're seeing maybe broadly in the industry, but we're going to talk a little bit about private cloud deployment models. And what I would suggest the takeaway from this section is think about these attributes, right? As you're considering what you need to do for your business, we tend to see several different considerations come into play to kind of help guide where these workloads need to live. These considerations often drive the decision on what type of private cloud needs to be used, but they can also be considerations for public cloud, right? These are things that broadly we're seeing customers recognize and kind of think about as they're making decisions on where these workloads are best hosted. The three big considerations that we're seeing: location, right? Latency matters, network cost in some cases can be very expensive. You've got legacy applications with databases that can't be upgraded or can't be changed out that have application servers next to them. The business wants to modernize the application servers. They want to take advantage of microservices within public cloud. They want to take advantage of data lake, big data type services. That's difficult when the database is kind of stuck in place. And historically, you would see a lot of that legacy investment built in data centers. But then you had challenges in getting that data center workload connected into, the microservices or the hyperscale cloud. So location still does drive quite a bit of consideration around where these workloads need to be placed. Latency and bandwidth, network availability are kind of the key drivers under that. Technology, choice of hypervisor, that is typically driven by the customer's existing investment, but increasingly we're seeing that driven by their desired future state, right? There's what they've done historically. We all know that there's increased risk with providers like Broadcom. There's uncertainty around that. That's causing a lot of businesses to say, what is my alternative plan? In some cases, they're making changes or accelerating changes they already had planned. In other cases, they're kind of staying put. But I would say that choice of technology really tends to dictate where your workload can be placed. And it typically is driven by what the business is familiar with using today, what kind of investment, both in people and tooling that they have, but also where do they want to go in the future. Moving toward a Microsoft-centric management paradigm, that's a common thing that we hear as well, right? If that's a thing that you're doing on a security standpoint, that may be a thing that you want to consider when you choose the technology for the cloud deployment. And then finally, architecture. This tends to be cost driven. Everybody would probably want private cloud if they could, dedicated infrastructure for themselves, but cost typically constrains that. A lot of times you find that the workload is small enough or the needs are not significant enough. There's not data sovereignty requirements or sensitivity. public cloud inherently is multi-tenant, right? You can have secure private resources within a multi-tenant environment, but you're operating alongside of other people. And you're doing that to save money generally and to improve elasticity and scalability. Um, so consider that, right? Does the business need something that requires or forces a requirement of dedicated architecture? Typically, we're seeing things like data sovereignty or technical requirements driving that. If you've got historical investment in architecture tooling, a common thing we hear is we just invested in Rubrik and Rubrik needs direct control of the hypervisor. Well, that's probably going to dictate what kind of cloud environment you can attach your new backup investment into, the architecture of the cloud, if you will. So pulling those three things together, we're gonna go through a little bit more detail on each one of these areas. But I think what we tend to see are you're typically leaning toward a dedicated type solution if resource isolation and performance are a consideration. Scalability, you may also be looking at dedicated if you're concerned about storage performance. That's often a driver that forces you into single tenancy because you can't guarantee storage performance in a shared architecture. Specialized workloads, those need to be considered as well. Sometimes there are not even cloud options for some of those specialized workloads, and you have to kind of bring in purpose-built infrastructure, but then layer as much of those cloud management attributes that you can on top of those specialized workloads. Data locality, edge cloud, we're seeing a lot of interest in that space because of some of these workloads that were left behind in the initial wave. Manufacturing is a big one. There are a lot of workloads still on customer floors that are not able to move due to latency or data locality type drivers. And then finally, cost efficiency. That's always front and center for everybody. I think increasingly so with the cost of everything around us going up. Businesses are looking for more efficiency. You're seeing a lot more people consider multi-tenancy where historically they were determined to build their own. It's very, very costly now to build dedicated cloud or dedicated infrastructure. I think we're definitely seeing a lot more customers open to considering multi-tenant solutions, primarily due to cost.
I think a key point of what all of this means is that companies like Lightedge ourselves, we've really expanded our product catalog to make sure that we're making all of these items available to our customers.
Great point, Duncan. Okay, so we're going to run through some of the different flavors, if you will, of private cloud and where we're seeing those decisions made and maybe some example use cases, customer scenarios that we see kind of gravitating toward that type of private cloud deployment architecture. So we'll start with dedicated cloud. Dedicated cloud is typically a purpose-built architecture. It could be located within a data center. It could be located within a customer premise. It really depends on the sizing of it, right? But it's dedicated infrastructure, single tenant. And we typically see that decision being made for technology and architecture reasons. You know, as a customer that you need dedicated tenancy because of data sovereignty, because of performance concerns. You've got a high sensitivity workload. You can't take the risk of that workload being mixed with other customers. You have deterministic performance characteristics, if you will. That's driving the architecture, the single tenancy architecture that we talked about. Technology is a big driver. We hear a lot of customers that have decades of investment in VMware. It is a big decision right now. Do you pivot that? Do you see as a company that maintaining that cloud yourself is a strategic differentiator? If you do, then the next question you're probably asking is, what do I do with the investment that most customers already have in VMware, both tooling and people? Do I look at alternatives and diversify my risk, or do I continue with that? Do I need to focus on other things and maybe stay the course with the existing technology partner? So location tends to be driven by where the data sits, so less of a consideration on choosing dedicated cloud, but that architecture and technology factors tend to be big factors in moving into a dedicated type architecture. Very common use case here is banking, financial sector. So we see a lot of regulated customers that have relatively large workloads. They're running their core applications, if you will, in-house. They do not want that data to go out of their four walls. They have compliance concerns around that, data sovereignty concerns, right? Cost is usually not as big of a consideration for an entity like that. They understand that it may cost more than a multi-tenant design, but they have to do it. That's their crown jewels, if you will. So we are seeing a lot of continued investment in that space, financial, regulated industry, government as well. Supporting industries to government as well, I would mention, right? Contractors, defense contractors, engineering firms that do work in the government space or do work in the regulated space often are also considering dedicated cloud as a solution. That allows them to build an environment that meets their performance requirements. Maybe not quite as flexible as multi-tenant, but you're increasingly seeing partners and service providers provide additional flexibility on top of that by using standard building blocks. So where historically dedicated cloud was very much a stand it up and forget about it for 3 to 5 years, come back around and hope you got the sizing right, and then kind of make the decision again and run it out for 3 to 5 years. You're seeing a lot more flexibility in this space from providers and vendors that are able to kind of ramp up and ramp down usage, even in a dedicated model, right? So back to that, bring the attributes of cloud, elasticity, and flexibility into these models. I think we're seeing a lot of that type of trend and capability as well. Duncan, anything you would like to add to this use case?
One thing as you were talking, Mike, and all those were great points, was a couple of years ago when we were looking at AI workloads, these were typically hosted on other people's servers or were a multi-tenant kind of proposition. Now, as businesses look to AI for their own internal uses, that data set needs to be walled off. So that's where we see dedicated cloud coming into play as well. Because you can control access to that data for your AI and not have it out there for the rest of the world. And I know that's important to most businesses.
Great point. The multi-tenant cloud. I think we tend to think about multi-tenant cloud as being a very similar architecture to dedicated cloud or single tenant cloud. It's just being shared, right? And with modern technologies and the right kind of process around it, you can get just as much security control, compliance, adherence within a multi-tenant cloud as you can within a dedicated cloud. So we do not tend to see a lot of concern, even from the regulated space, on using multi-tenant cloud. There are additional considerations you have to make. You're tending to be looking at a service provider to take advantage of this type of architecture, although customers are considering this type of architecture. Larger enterprise customers that have multiple business units that built up islands of infrastructure over the years are also considering architectures like this to minimize cost, right? Do the design and programming groups really need separate resources, or can we trust and build process and controls around the architecture to kind of provide that data sovereignty that's important to us? You can do that in multi-tenant platforms, right? Architecture tends to be the primary driving consideration here. Again, most companies have large investments in their tooling. They're considering that when they choose a multi-tenant platform, and they're also choosing multi-tenancy due to the cost savings, right? So a typical use case here, maybe that same enterprise customer that's buying dedicated and has a smaller workload somewhere else that they don't want to stand up an entire second dedicated stack for. Disaster recovery is a big use case, right? Leveraging multi-tenancy, the cost efficiency of that, even when you have dedicated for your production workload, you can get some cost savings on the disaster recovery, backup, dev, seasonal workloads, or smaller industries, companies that have small quantities of VMs. Historically, you were able to turn up dedicated cloud environments with very small amounts of VMs. Nowadays, that's a $10,000, $20,000 a month investment to do a dedicated environment, right? It's a six-figure investment. So you're increasingly seeing those smaller customers, or customers with smaller workloads, I should say, that historically did it themselves, considering multi-tenant because it's become too expensive to do it themselves. Duncan, anything you want to add to this?
I think you covered. I think that the one of the key things here is that with a lot of the technology, the way it's evolved, multi-tenancy makes a lot more sense now, as customers can really have peace of mind, is that they're not going to deal with the noisy neighbor issue that we've seen in the past with multi-tenancy. And as we have data center in a box, basically, we can really segregate those workloads and those environments. So it really does give you kind of a dedicated feel with the price tag of a multi-tenant cloud.
Duncan, I think we had a question in chat. If you want to take a
Oh,
look at
let's
that.
look. Yeah, let me look at that.
Next slide here.
Sure.
Chance to respond to that. Great question.
Yeah. Any thoughts on HPE Morpheus and HP VM Essentials? Mike, what are your thoughts there?
Well, is Morpheus? I'm not familiar with Morpheus. Is that part of their Green Lake technology or part of their management plan?
That's a good question. I'm actually not familiar with the those uh, uh,
I'll look that
type
up.
of
Yeah, I'll look
technology. Yeah, we'll figure that out.
on that. That's a great question. So Edge Cloud. Why don't I hit this and I'll look at that
Yeah.
question. So Edge Cloud, big uptick in this. Again, manufacturing space, retail. There's a need to deal with workload that is currently on-prem that cannot be moved. Typically in the manufacturing space, that's tied to those machines. Retail is another big one. You've got that technology on the floor. Often it's security system driven, and you're seeing a lot of interest in the retail space in particular at putting edge compute out there to take advantage of those cameras, if you will, to kind of augment existing capabilities with AI, right? So definitely seeing a demand to expand current edge infrastructure deployments in the retail space, and then just frankly deploy it for the first time with organizations like manufacturing. There are other use cases where this makes sense. I would suggest that when you're thinking about edge, location matters the most, right? You're typically considering that type of model because you have workload that's latency sensitive. You can't move it too far away from where it is. We see this in banking, finance, medical as well, where you have process that is tied to the location and very latency sensitive. We worked with an insurance company a few years back that had all of their claims processing. We're talking billions of dollars going through it was a cluster of VMs, right? It's highly available, but that cluster of VMs, whenever they tried to move it outside of their four walls, they had performance issues with the application, and it got to a point where that workload was so sensitive to the business would pay any amount of money to make sure that workload stayed on-prem, even if that workload cost them 10 times as much as moving it to a public cloud or a private cloud type solution in a data center. They were willing to pay for that. So edge cloud typically is not driven by cost. It tends to be driven by latency and network considerations.
Another critical piece around edge cloud is extensibility into the hyperscalers. So you might have a workload where that works perfectly fine on your edge cloud for most of the year, but for whatever reason you need to extend into a VM or set of VMs, perhaps a DR solution into the hyperscale. So you get the flexibility that hyperscalers offer, and we see this typically around let's say a big holiday like Christmas or Mother's Day, where your business is dependent on that holiday, and you're going to have a lot of traffic coming to your site. This offers that edge play into the hyperscale where you can utilize the flexibility of hyperscale cloud compute.
So Brian, back to
Go ahead, Mike. Excuse me. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
I was going to switch gears, Duncan. So are you done with edge?
Yeah, all done. Yeah, you bet.
So Brian, your question about Morpheus, it wasn't clicking. I am familiar with that. That's HP's
Right.
branding around their hypervisor. I am familiar with that. The name wasn't clicking for me. I may break that out if we have some time at the end. I definitely have some thoughts. I'm sure Duncan does from a product standpoint. Look, everybody's looking for alternatives to Broadcom. I think what HP is doing is interesting. I think they're well positioned to capitalize on that. I think the challenge is, you've got really everybody else is a very, very distant second from where VMware was, right? So you're seeing a
Yeah.
lot of scrambling. Who will emerge as kind of the alternative to VMware? That's a big question mark. Um, Frankly, I think we're seeing a lot of customers that initially reacted to VMware and kind of knee jerked into let's move it all. And you're seeing some risk with that approach as well, right? So whether it's HP or, you're seeing a lot of people consider open source options again, which are typically extremely expensive from a time investment standpoint, right? So it's definitely a thing that businesses have to consider. Um, my high level take is the industry is probably going to shake that out, and I think HP's got a great story. They've got a lot of technology holdings around the hypervisor, and the Zerto, the disaster recovery, the backup space, the storage space, right? So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
I think across the industry from a product point of view, to your point, Mike, and we were thinking about the same thing, by the way. I was just about to hit this question too. We're seeing a lot of competitors, kind of rise to the top, especially around the VMware Broadcom story. And it's really going to come down to feature set and functionality and ease of use, as to what customers adopt and which ones will, have comparative market saturation compared to VMware.
All right, bare metal. So definitely seeing an uptick in bare metal. Technology tends to drive this decision. I think we mentioned AI, ML workloads, big data. Um, I'm constantly surprised on the amount of questions we get around bare metal because the hyperscalers don't have available capacity. We're constantly talking to people that are looking for, what you would say are very, very small workloads, right? We're talking, a couple of GPU servers to do some analytics, part-time analytics, not even 24 by 7, and they're having availability issues, right? So getting a lot of customers talking again about bare metal, standing up their own environment to mitigate the risk. They may be emerging AI companies. They may be companies that have workload that they don't, or data that they don't want to put out in the cloud, if you will, that are considering building bigger bare metal type solutions to kind of do that workload. Cost is the other big driver, right? I would say deterministic performance historically was a big driver for bare metal. You'd have customers considering that because they didn't trust the performance of hyperscalers. That still happens. You still have licensing sometimes driving decisions to go or consider bare metal, right? Oracle licensing is a common one where their licensing rules are so strict, people consider bare metal for those types of workloads just to stay within the licensing rules. But um, definitely an uptick in the bare metal space again, but for different reasons.
Yeah, I can remember a couple of years ago, Mike, and I'm sure you had a similar experience where, the industry was saying, "Well, bare metal's dead. It's all going to be in the cloud," and we've really not seen that. What bare metal has done is risen to the occasion, and with data center in a box and the way the technology has really evolved, it makes bare metal really compelling for some customers based on their workloads.
Agreed. So final architecture we see quite a bit of is broadly, we're going to refer to it as specialized architecture. There's a lot of different platforms that would fall under this umbrella, but think about things like IBM mid-range, IBM I, AIX, AS400, HP Unix, GPU-centric workload in some cases could fall under this umbrella. But what we're seeing an uptick in this area is really driven by two things. One is limited availability. Sometimes it's legacy limitations. Sometimes it's just chipset limitations, right? But as these customers are considering specialized architecture, it is often difficult to find options in the classic cloud provider space, right? So that's driving customers to kind of consider, what do I do with these specialized architectures? Can I find a way, again, to extend the attributes of cloud, the manageability, the flexibility? I'm on a mid-range today. I may not be on a mid-range 2 years from now, but I have no idea if I'm going to be able to move this workload off of it, right? That's a multi-year strategy. So what do I do with it in the meantime? It's a core business function. Who can I work with to extend the roadmap, if you will, on those specialized architectures, or give me a roadmap in the first place? Typical use case here, again, finance. We see a lot of this in finance, manufacturing. Banking tends to run their core, they call it system of record, but they tend to run their core databases on things like mainframes and mid ranges. Manufacturing, there's a lot of manufacturing companies still running their ERPs on mid range, or HP Unix type systems. GPU centric workloads are kind of an emerging thing that's hitting all different areas, but we tend to see a lot of this in the finance and manufacturing space.
It's a great breakdown, Mike. We've got another question here, and I want to just read it real quick. VMware is only concerned about top tier, very premium partners. They got rid of all efforts covering long tail partners, and those can be a partner of yours. What are you offering as an alternative technologies in the absence of VMware? This is a great question, and something that I deal with quite a bit is the product lead for our cloud efforts. And so, we've seen the rise of Nutanix, but it doesn't stop with just Nutanix. We're looking at, for our Microsoft centric customers, Azure Local as a dedicated resource, but also with extensibility into the hyperscalers. We've also looked at some open clouds that are out there to possibly bring to a market. This is something that I work on every day at Lightedge, and will continue to make sure that our product catalog is multifaceted in this way, so that a one size doesn't fit everyone, because we know that's just not the state of play in the cloud market today. So hopefully that answers your question. Anything you wanted to add there, Mike?
The other thing I would add, Duncan, is we have worked with a lot of partners that were hit by that same issue. And in some cases, the answer for them was use Lightedge and continue with VMware, right? People aren't happy about it. The way in which they did it was not great. But frankly, VMware was trying to do exactly what Broadcom did for years. They just were not successful at doing it. They were trying to move people up stack as well. So I think what we've also seen is, because we have better buying power and better leverage with VMware, in a lot of cases, we've been able to work with those partners to maintain what they have, and in a lot of cases cap cost, right? I'm not saying it didn't go up at all, but when you look at the surface of what Broadcom did on that pricing, I think in most cases we were able to kind of remove that delta when you look at the overall solution, kind of factor in technology refresh, efficiencies of data center scale, things like that, and kind of go back to the customer with, look, you've got a choice. Either A, you're going to kind of break from VMware and put your eggs in a different basket, like Duncan's saying, or B,
right,
you just have to stay. You're going to pay the cost no matter what. And what can Lightedge do to help you minimize the cost, which in a lot of cases was quite a bit.
Yeah, and those upfront costs are not the only consideration. You've got people trained in VMware for years and years and years that have a lot of knowledge and understanding there, and that's just not something that businesses are easily going to throw away in a lot of cases. So great points, Mike.
All right. So data sovereignty and edge computing, I know we're running up on time. I really want to end with the kind of pulling it all together. So I think we hit a lot of this data sovereignty. We're definitely seeing movement in that space. Regulatory controls continue to increase. Finding a way to meet those compliance controls while still giving the business attributes of cloud is increasingly challenging. I think it's back to that point of it's very expensive to build private cloud, right? There tend to be reasons for it. Sometimes you can save money, but on the other hand, there are a lot of other considerations that go into that, right? Not just technology, but also things like compliance, controls, security considerations, right? We're definitely seeing that, particularly with edge computing and data sovereignty, right? A lot of customers interested in that. Maybe think of edge computing as a smaller version of dedicated private cloud in a way, right? So there are some interesting technologies out in the industry right now. Dell, HP, really focused on edge. And I don't think edge compute really turned into what people thought it was. I think people originally thought edge compute was going to be, hey, we've got two VMs left, throw some micro server out on prem, and that's edge compute. I think what we're seeing is there are some very, very large workloads that remain in enterprise customer sites, that could be considered edge, that need very large infrastructure investments against them, right? So when you think about edge, don't just think two VMs in the corner. Think something that needs to remain on-prem or in a different location for these reasons. All right. So key takeaways. I'm going to run through this high level, and then Duncan, I'd love you to kind of close us out. But I think what we'd love to kind of challenge the audience with is, when you're thinking about these workloads, consider these things, right? Consider where the applications need to go, what they need. When you hear the word move to cloud, or when you hear the phrase move to cloud, don't think of that as everything has to go into the cloud, as much as what is the right home, if you will, for those applications, and how can I best provide the capabilities of cloud on top of those applications. Consider IT drivers, right? You've got to consider the investment you've made in the past. You've got to consider time availability. Will the team have enough time to kind of support whatever that path is, whether it's private cloud, public cloud, do it yourself? Consider those things. AI, everybody talks about AI. You definitely need to think about it. You're not behind your peers. Everybody is in the same boat of kind of thinking about it, but it is driving a big change in infrastructure, right? So if the business needs AI and they're not going to be happy with that data going off site, there could be a large dollar, number attached to that that's not part of your historic budget, right? So get the answers from the business. If AI does need to be part of your roadmap, it most likely does, but then give them guidance on what that's going to mean for the budget. There's probably significant investment needed there to support that. Edge cloud, for latency sensitive data, we talked about that, right? Don't think about that as only an option for the two VMs in the broom closet. Think about that as potentially an answer for some of these legacy workloads, latency sensitive, maybe even AI, right? Building an edge cloud environment for AI sandbox, so the business can kind of start to learn about it. That may be an option. And then plan for hybrid. I think our final call out here would be hybrid, multi-cloud, whatever you want to call it. No customer has all their workload in the same location anymore. Everybody has multi-cloud. Getting that multi-cloud, that hybrid environment to talk to each other was kind of the problem of the last 5 years. Now I would say that the biggest problem is getting the flexibility from the providers to allow for changes within that, right? Everybody has hybrid cloud. Everybody heard how difficult it was to get it all to talk together. But now you're making choices that have increasingly small windows, right? You're not able to commit to 5 years anymore. The business doesn't know. Things are changing too rapidly. So whatever you choose, make sure you have flexibility within that to move that workload or change that later. I think we're increasingly seeing customers saying, I can't commit to 3 to 5 years. I just don't know where this workload's going to be. So the hardware providers, service providers all have creative ways to kind of provide that flexibility. Make sure to ask for that.
I think it's these are all great points, Mike. Really well said. And I think it's important, as you're looking to your edge story, or it's not your edge story, your cloud story rather, to of course, be flexible, but also look towards what you're solving for. It's not necessarily a technology that you have to pay attention to as much as what is my workload? What am I trying to do with this workload? What makes the most sense? And then you want to come to a knowledgeable service provider like Lightedge, and we can really help with some thought leadership and guidance as to what will work best for your solution in the cloud in any of its varieties, in any of its variations. With AI on the emergence, a couple of years ago, companies were really just playing around with AI. Now we're seeing true money savings and real interesting use cases with AI that's not only driving a lot of functionality in the business, but also lowering cost based on the actual functionality and what AI can do for a business. So all good things to keep in mind.
Any other questions in chat? I know we're right on time, but Duncan, I'd love kind of as a parting thought, where do you see things going over the next 2, 3 years from a product, roadmap strategy? Where do you get excited about
Sure.
product design?
Yeah, I'm excited about AI and some of the things that we're going to be bringing to market in the next couple of months and years. Also excited about the different cloud technologies that are out there and what's being done. Some of us went to the Nutanix.next conference here this last May in Washington D.C. And what I was really struck by was all of the work that they're doing to improve what can be done with the Nutanix platform. It's only a couple of years old, but they're really working hard to rise to the level of functionalities that VMware provides, and they're not the only ones. That's just a single example. And so I think as we move into the future, there's just a lot of opportunity out there in the cloud, and it's not so cut and dry as we once thought. We've spoken about a lot of these technologies and what's best and when to use what where, but really that's the story of cloud is what aren't we going to be able to do with it and in all of its varieties. So I think that's what's keeping my job very interesting, and I love my job as these technologies emerge. And I'd also say that I certainly didn't expect to be where we are in 2025 in 2014 when I really in earnest started my cloud journey and really started to get my head wrapped around the technology. So a lot more to come, and it's stuff we're working hard on every day on the product side.
Well said, Duncan. Well, thank you everyone for your time today. Hopefully you found this session informative. Appreciate it.
Appreciate everybody. Thanks so much.